each familial area, is cordoned off by a curtain. There are over 2,000 people in this facility in Beirut. And literally, Christine, the size of each cordoned off curtain area is maybe twice the size of a regular bathroom.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Christine Romans, filling in for Yasmin Vossoughian. On the show today, as the war in the Middle East stretches on, a growing humanitarian crisis for those displaced by the conflict, Yasmin reports from inside a refugee center in Beirut. Plus, the longest-running partial government shutdown might soon be over. We'll check in with Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill. Meanwhile, in Washington today, Lebanon and Israel are back at the negotiating table discussing an extension to the ongoing ceasefire agreement. The Lebanese president has laid out his biggest objective, the withdrawal of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon. But continued Israeli bombardment is complicating an already tense negotiation. The ongoing fighting there is also fueling a mounting humanitarian crisis in the region. UNICEF says over 1.1 million people have been displaced in Lebanon alone, including nearly 400,000 children. NBC News correspondent and your regular Here's the Scoop host, Yasmin Vossoughian, is back in Beirut and visited with families in a refugee center there. Hi, Yasmin.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you, too. Another very busy day for you. Both Israel and Hezbollah have accused each other of violating the ceasefire, Yasmin. Yesterday, while you were in southern Lebanon, a Lebanese journalist, Amal Khalil, was killed in the buffer zone by Israeli strikes. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says that Hezbollah members launched an anti-tank missile toward IDF soldiers operating in southern Lebanon earlier today. So is there still a ceasefire happening here?
The ceasefire is still in effect, I guess, in literal terms, but in practice, there have been violations of the ceasefire since day one. And what I mean by that is we've talked about this buffer zone repeatedly over the last week. And the buffer zone was an ask or a demand of the Lebanese government that the IDF, that Israelis pull out of the buffer zone when the ceasefire went into effect. They didn't do that. They have not pulled out. So the IDF even having that buffer zone now is technically a violation of the ceasefire. That's one. There's also the lobbying of missiles back and forth between Israel and Hezbollah, which have happened incrementally in the south. There was just a strike today in the southern region as well. That is technically a violation of the ceasefire. These kind of small attacks have been happening repeatedly where they are kind of targeting more of Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is also launching on the buffer zone. So we've seen several instances in which Hezbollah has actually launched on Lebanon inside the buffer zone, where the IDF is keeping that area secure and has pushed all Lebanese people north of that, creating subsequently a million plus humanitarian crisis here in that country. So Amal Khalil was a journalist. She has been very active. She was very well known here. She was both a broadcast journalist and print journalist. She has been covering this war and many wars for quite some time. She was inside the buffer zone. She was in her car alongside her colleague when a strike hit right near her car. So Amal and her colleague exited the vehicle and they went into a home, again, all inside the buffer zone. That home was then struck, burying both journalists, both Amal and her colleague, under rubble. When they were finally able to get to Amal Khalil, she was deceased. That was around midnight local time here in Lebanon. The IDF is saying they do not target journalists. Amal Khalil was a journalist.
As you mentioned, the fighting is largely happening in this buffer zone, primarily happening in the buffer zone on the border between Israel and Lebanon that is now occupied, as you said, by Israeli Defense Forces. It has forced people out of their homes. More than 1 million people have been displaced. And you visited a refugee center in Beirut filled with these families who've left this buffer zone because they're so fearful. Tell us about what you saw there.
So we pull up to this hospitality school and it says L'École Hospital, right? So they would normally be teaching people about how to run hotels. and get into that type of business. So as you walk upstairs, you begin to see families, mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers, children, everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Everyone looks like they're kind of still in their pajamas and their slippers, and maybe they haven't showered in a few days. And then you begin to see all these curtains. So each area, each family area, familial area, is cordoned off by a curtain. There are over 2,000 people in this facility in Beirut. There are about 1,000 families. So imagine how many children are amongst those 2,000 people. And literally, Christine, the size of each cordoned off curtain area is maybe twice the size of a regular bathroom. They are each squeezing around 8 to 10 people in each of these. When you walk inside these little curtained areas, curtain cordon off areas, there's a mattress that has been pushed up against the wall because this is the middle of the day and it's not time for sleep. It's as if they've kind of created this little living area even inside these curtains. There is pots and pans. There is a pile of pita bread. There's kids inside. And the kids are running in and out.
How old are you? How old?
4.
4? 3? 10? Are you 10?
Oh, 3.
4. Show me 4.
And I just thought it was so incredible to see because in light of all of this heartbreak, these little kids, in a way, had adjusted to just being kids again. There's this whole big kitchen area where everybody shares, the stove. And again, these are 2,000 people. So everybody's sharing the stove. It's a big kitchen area. There was even a fight in the kitchen between 2 women when we were there over whoever was going to get, the place in line to make the food for their family. It just speaks to the high level of stress likely that the adults have taken on in understanding that they're having to bring their children here, but also to the sense of normalcy they're trying to maintain for their children.
You spoke with a young woman, a 21-year-old woman named Marwa. What did she tell you about what life is like for her and her family right now?
So Marwa Yazbek is 21 years old, and she lives in this refugee center with her mother, her father, her 2 sisters, one of whose name is Malek, their children, and their husbands. And they're all in this tiny little area. And Marwa said that she wants to be a doctor. She's studying medicine. And I asked her if it's hard to study in a place like this. And she says, essentially, we make do. We figured out it's going to be okay. She had to go to a class even right after I had talked to her. And she told me that they've been there since almost the beginning of the war.
All of us know that we're here because of the war, because Israel is killing people, the civilians in the area we are living. We just knew that we must go from there because of the bombs that are killing people.
And I asked her then what it feels like to not know when you're going to be able to go home.
We have a hope to go to home in the near future, but it's hard to not live now in our home. But we always have a hope in God that there's something that is right will continue and will happen because we're right. So everything is gonna be okay in the future.
The problem is that Marwa's story is one of over 1 million people now that have been displaced because of this ongoing war in Lebanon.
The situation's so obviously so difficult for her and her family and so many other families. They're just not alone, as we've said. Here's the UNICEF spokesperson, James Elder, speaking to NBC News earlier this week.
In Lebanon, we're less than 1/4 funded. So I talk about that work we're doing of water, of sanitation, of education, of psychological support, of shelter, and 3/4 unfunded. That has day-to-day impacts in terms of the services, the support we can get to children and mothers.
You know, this is all happening in the wake of dramatic cuts from the Trump administration last year, aid cuts The State Department dismantled USAID, massive reductions in global aid spending overall. So is the financial situation something, the withdrawal of American support on the global stage, is it something you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, because Lebanon has had a history of a lot of economic instability in its past, which remains even into today. And the prime minister actually gave an interview to the Washington Post while he was in Paris a few days ago. And he mentioned that while they are trying to disarm Hezbollah, they need aid, they need funding, they need money in order to do that, i.e. build up their military might, build up the Lebanese military if they're going to disarm the military arm of Hezbollah. He also talked about the fact that they need aid from U.S. organizations to help rebuild. You talk about the 1 million+ people that have been displaced, and it's one of the reasons why the Lebanese prime minister is now asking the United States for help in rebuilding. And he sees that as a path towards establishing peace with Israel. Because the more disenfranchised people you have, the more people that you have out of work, the more people that you have without shelter, the more likely it is you are to have conflict. And that is why it seems now the Lebanese government is trying to reverse course on that in helping reestablish some of these refugees who have had to leave the South.
Yes, thank you. We'll see if the outcome from today's talks in D.C. does anything to improve the situation there in Lebanon. The ambassador-level talks were moved from the State Department to the White House this afternoon so that President Trump could meet with the participants. We'll have more on the outcome at NBCnews.com. Congressional Republicans are closer to ending the months-long Department of Homeland Security shutdown. Early Thursday morning, in a mostly party-line vote, the Senate narrowly passed a budget resolution that makes it possible to bypass the filibuster to fund Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol. Meanwhile, Democrats got a key win earlier this week in Virginia, where voters narrowly approved a redistricting plan that could help the Democrats gain up to 4 House seats in the midterm elections. For more on how both parties are responding, I'm joined by NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Christine.
Okay, let's start with DHS funding here. We're still in the middle of the biggest, longest partial government shutdown in history. Democrats will not budge unless there are restrictions placed on ICE. The resolution that the Senate Republicans passed, it doesn't actually fund ICE and Border Patrol. What exactly does it do? And what needs to happen to get those agencies funded?
So this is the path out of the end of this incredibly long, kind of senseless Department of Homeland Security shutdown. And basically what we see Republicans and Democrats doing is giving them both an exit valve. The Democrats do not want to be on board any sort of legislation that funds Custom and Border Patrol, Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, as it's more commonly known. They don't want to vote for any extension of that funding without the serious reforms that they've been begging for quite some time, which include making sure that ICE agents are not wearing masks, that they have body cams, that there are judicial warrants, those things that we've talked about a million times. Republicans just aren't interested in that. So basically the way out of this is that they've gone through what's called the budget reconciliation process, which normally puts anyone that's not a congressional nerd to sleep as soon as you start talking about it. But the important part about it is that it would fund those two agencies basically through the balance of the Trump administration, and it would prevent Democrats from having to vote for it. And they've already passed a bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security outside of those two agencies long term in the Senate. And what the House has suggested is if you can pass this funding stream through the reconciliation process so Democrats don't have to vote for it, then we'll pass that separate sidecar legislation that would keep the Department of Homeland Security open for an extended period of time. So this seems to be the path out. I heavily emphasize the word seems because this still needs to go back to the House. And whenever the reconciliation bucket is open, people want to pour all their additional projects into it to try and get it over the finish line, especially given the fact that you don't need Democrat votes to do that. That makes the process complicated. So we're as close as we've ever been to ending this shutdown. It's not going to happen until next week, but nothing's a guarantee until that package gets over the finish line.
Ryan, let's talk about this new reporting from NBC News that our colleagues have reported, several different sources revealing that supervisors are telling ICE, agents they're no longer allowed to go into someone's home without a judicial warrant. They are not going to immigration court hearings and picking people up at immigration court hearings in big numbers like they had been before. That had made Democrats so angry. People going to try to fulfill, go through the legal process with their asylum claims, and then they just were disappeared from court. Does this give, I guess, these different moves, does it make it easier for lawmakers to defend ICE back home?
I think it absolutely does. And I also think it was a recognition by the Trump administration that they were really losing the PR battle when it came to this mass deportation program. Immigration was among President Trump's number one issues leading into the 2024 election. He had broad-based support, not just from the MAGA base, but from independents and even a lot of Democrats. That might be one of the main reasons, that in the economy, that they won the 2024 election. And all of that goodwill evaporated at the beginning of the year, especially when you saw 2 American citizens lose their lives, when you saw children ripped away from their parents, these terrible stories. And there was this idea, this feeling that it wasn't just criminal immigrants that ICE was targeting. It was just basically anyone that came into the country without the proper paperwork. And so the president kind of overhauled the DHS program. He put his border czar, Tom Homan, in charge of it, who's definitely used a much softer touch in trying to get this over the finish line. There's a feeling that Stephen Miller, who's been the hardline immigration warrior in the White House, has been sidelined a bit in this conversation. It's clearly a recognition that what they were doing wasn't working. And, there are many people within the administration, Tom Homan among them, and many on Capitol Hill, that believe accomplishing their goals are actually much more successful doing it this way. If they actually do want to get criminal undocumented immigrants out of the country, this is a better way about doing it. Not just randomly knocking on doors, not just showing up at immigration court, not showing up at schools and picking parents off as they're dropping their kids off. It just doesn't work as well.
Ryan, you've covered Virginia politics for a very long time. And in Virginia, some news. Voters dealt the GOP a big loss in this redistricting ballot measure that could give Democrats 4 additional seats in November. This was in response to Texas's GOP redistricting. How is the GOP responding now?
Well, I think there is a lot. There are a number of House Republicans that are having buyer's remorse when it comes to the president's push to go through this redistricting war. In many ways, Christine, I feel like this is the first time that Democrats have met Donald Trump on a battlefield of his choosing and actually won that battle. For almost the balance of the Trump era of American politics, Democrats have kind of put their nose in the air and said that they're going to take the higher ground. And Trump's been happy to let them do that. And as a result, has just amassed power as a result of their unwillingness to play his game. They just did not do that this time around. He drew first blood in Texas, and then they went all in on states where they knew that they could draw maps that would work to their benefit. And I think what's important about the way it's worked out in both California and Virginia, they had to put these measures in front of the voters to say, are you okay with this? And in both instances, the voters said yes. And that's an indication that there is support for Democrats to take Donald Trump on at his own game. And what was once an opportunity for Republicans to pick up 5, maybe 6 seats could end up with a net benefit toward Democrats just in the way that the lines are drawn. And I have to tell you, Christine, the Democrats that I'm talking to, especially given where Donald Trump's polling is right now, the chances of this being a wave election, they actually believe that the way the Republicans have drawn these districts in the states that they were hoping to gain seats could actually benefit Democrats, because it's not as if you can create new Republican voters. You have to take the existing Democrat voters and put them somewhere else. So what you're doing is you're taking a Republican district that might be plus 20 in a previous election cycle and making it a plus 10 Republican seat to try and dilute a Democratic district. Well, there are Democrats that believe any district that's within a 15-point margin is up for grabs in this upcoming election cycle. So Republicans have really gotten themselves into a redistricting mess that is largely of their own making.
And finally, President Trump has announced we're in an indefinite ceasefire with Iran. Not clear really what the state of the war is here. Are there any deadlines coming up where President Trump has to go to Congress and get approval, permission, guidance? Yeah, so the Constitution clearly states that the president has 60 days to engage in any sort of military activity before he has to come and get some level of congressional support. And there has not been any sort of formal sign off by members of Congress for this action in Iran. And we're fast approaching that deadline. There's some disagreement as to the exact day when the Iran conflict started, but it is by every measure in the beginning of May. And there is a growing chorus of both Republicans and Democrats that believe that the White House needs to come to Congress and make the case for this conflict long term. And whether or not they pass something that is at least supportive or gives the sign off remains to be seen. Because the other part of this, Christine, is, there's the explicit congressional approval, which is necessary, but there's also the funding of the war. The Pentagon certainly has a lot of money, but if this conflict drags on for a certain amount of time, you can bet Donald Trump's going to come to Congress looking for money, and he's not going to get that money unless he gets Congress to buy in. And keep in mind, if he does it, he needs to do it before the midterm elections, because if Democrats take control of either the House or Senate, that task becomes even more difficult. Ryan Nobles. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, guys.
That's going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Christine Romans, filling in for Yasmin Vossoughian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. If you like what you heard, subscribe.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.